there, and welcome to Personalization Point Episode 6, the math of personalization and why the theory of it's only for enterprise or it's only for tier 1, we need to light up like a Christmas tree. My name is Becc Holland. I'm the CEO and founder of Flip the Script. Before we jump in, if you do me a small favor, go ahead and go to flipthescript.co so you can be sure to download the deck for this session. It's a little hard to read, and I want you to be able to follow along at each step of the way. So once you've done that, let's go ahead and jump on into the content. So let's go ahead and start with an agenda. So there's going to be 6 parts to today's agenda. So number 1, the time allotments for research. So we're really going to get into the quote-unquote weeds of, what does the daily flow look like? But number 1, we're going to cover the time allotment for research, the time that you need to research every single prospect. Number 2, the time that it takes to write emails with heavy personalization. So how many minutes should you be spending there? Number 3, the time it takes to write emails with light personalization. And we'll go into the difference between the two. Number 4, the time it takes to make a call with personalization. Number 5, the math given the previous compendium. So given all of these inputs, what is the math behind what your day looks like when it comes to personalized messaging? And then number 6, we're going to light up the theory that you should use personalization on enterprise only like a Christmas tree. So let's go into number 1, time allotment for research. So how long you should be spending for research is no longer than 5 minutes per prospect. And the great thing about this is when you are going to the prospect on LinkedIn and you're understanding, okay, what are the different personalized premises that I should be using? Then the great news is data isn't perfect, nowhere close. So you can find out at that point, is this truly the person that I want to reach out to? Or is this person no longer at the company? Were they never at the company at all? Did they change roles, etc.? So this can be a great place where you can trim out users who you actually don't want to call into. But it should take you no longer than 5 minutes to hunt 3 personalized premises, and you can store them within Outreach so that you never have to research again. So if you want to see the mechanics of how to do that, if you go to Season 1, Episode 19 on how to not over-research, then I go very, very deeply, even with examples based on Manny Medina, David Cancel, and I believe John Dick over at HubSpot. But essentially, you should be spending no longer than 5 minutes to tease out 3 personalized premises with excerpts. So, I go into the workflow there, but that's how long that takes, and that's how long it took my reps. So, after you've done it a couple of times, it can be slower in the first week or so, but then once you get it down, it's like you're just churning it out. Usually it only takes me about actually 3 minutes to find these premises. Number 2, the time allotment it should take to write an email with heavy personalization is 8 minutes. So out of every sequence, I'm doing 5 emails and I'm doing 10 cold calls and 1 LinkedIn research step. So 16 steps over 21 days, business days. And emails 1, 3, and 4 are the emails that I incorporate what I would call heavy personalization. And so, the emails 2 and 5 are extremely light personalization. Really, all you're doing is double checking a factor, but it really is kind of a template. But emails 1, 3, and 4 are the emails within those 5 emails that incorporate heavy personalization. And I walk through all of the inputs. If you want to see my language and how to tie it in, if you go to go.reggie.io, I have a partnership with Reggie and the Zapper Consulting team, and then also a partnership with Outreach and the other sales engagement vendors, where you can see all of the type of messaging that I write. But essentially, to put these inputs in there takes no longer than 8 minutes. Really, I was getting this down to like 3 or 4 minutes of the teams, because really all you're doing is putting personalized premise number 1, and then you're hooking it in the middle and stating a leading indicator and then tying it off. So no longer than 8 minutes for emails 1, 3, and 4 that are heavy personalization. For the emails with light personalization, which are emails 2 and 5, no longer than 5 minutes. Really all you're doing at this point for emails 2 and 5, I won't go too far into depth, but you're just double checking that all the dynamic tags are correct. Email 2 is an emoji email, meaning it's a reply email. So essentially you've already emailed the person once and you're replying to it with any thoughts and adding some content. So that should take you no longer than 5 minutes to double check the name and then go ahead and ship it. And then email 5 is the same case scenario. It's a breakup email, and there's extremely little, few dynamic tags that you need to double check. But really all you're doing at this point is making sure that their name is spelled correctly, that their company is not Target Inc. versus Target, and you're going ahead and sending it. So no longer than 5 minutes. And I'm giving these upper limits of, like, when I say upper limits, I mean upper limits. Like, this should take me, I mean, a lot of case scenarios, 30 seconds to double check and go ahead and send. Time it takes to make a personalization call. So essentially, in every single call step, I'm referencing the previous email that I sent. And so that previous email, you are hunting the personalized premise off of the first 5 minutes of research that you did. So the time that it takes to make a call is the exact same amount of time that it makes to take a quote unquote relevant call, where you're just saying the buyer persona elevator pitch. So essentially, personalization adds no extra time to how long it takes for me to make a call. Let me repeat that out there before we blow up these myths. Personalization, making a personalized call, makes no additional effort and takes no additional time than making a quote unquote just relevant call. So you should have all these premises saved within Outreach. They should be, shuffling to the top, so when someone picks up, you can go ahead and state it. So I'm putting 2 minutes on the high end that it would take to make a dial. But when I say high end, I mean high end. It's only 2 minutes, to make a dial. Arguably, it's a couple of seconds. If the person picks up, then that's a different story, obviously, and you have a longer conversation. But it takes no additional time than making a just quote unquote relevant call. Number 5, the math given the previous inputs. So the math of personalization is there are 480 minutes in an 8-hour day. So let's say that you are working 8 hours in your day. I remember my first part-time job, just kidding. So 480 minutes, and you are sending the average activity metric that I got my teams up to as a minimum was 30 emails and 60 calls per day is what I was getting them to. Keep in mind, Bridge Group and Topo Research prove that the average activity metric for any rep in the industry is anywhere from 35 to 40 calls. So not only were we matching the level of quote unquote just relevant calls, we were close to doubling in some cases what reps were doing in terms of activity metrics. So at minimum, we would match them, but actually because of the system that we have, we were doubling the activity metric and also the level of quality. So these were minimums that I put in place for my reps. So based on that math, if I have 30 emails that I need to be sending every single day, and I'm going to say that because of out of the 5 emails, only 2 of them were light personalization and 3 of them were heavy personalization, 60% of 30 is going to be 18. So 18 of those emails are going to be heavy personalization. So I put 18 high personalized emails, 8 minutes a piece on the high end, gives you 144 minutes. For the light personalization emails, which were 2 out of 5 in the sequence, so that is 40%. So 40% of 30 is going to be 12. So 12 low personalization or light personalization emails times 5 minutes gives me 60 minutes. 60 calls per day times 2 minutes of research, or 2 minutes per call for the personalization is 120 minutes. And then for the research, if I have 90 pieces of activity, because I'm doing 30 emails and 60 calls, so 90 pieces of activity, and there are 15 steps in every single sequence that are actual activity, that means that for an average sequence, I would need to feed in 6 new prospects per day to make sure that I was getting to that level of activity. So I said 6 new prospects per day. To do research on each one of these would be 5 minutes, so it's going to be 30 minutes to do that. But just for, just for fun's sake, I said, let's go ahead and 3x that. Let's say that I'm doing 3x the amount of prospects that I need to load just for safety's sake, so we can put this to rest. Let's say that I'm adding 18 prospects per day, even though the activity metric that given this math would say I'd only need to add 6. But let's say, for instance, that I have to load 18 people in there, and it's 5 minutes of research apiece for every single prospect at the onset of the sequence, which would give me 90 minutes. So in total, if you add 144 minutes for the high personalized emails, plus 60 minutes for the low personalized emails or light personalized emails, plus 120 minutes for the calls that you're making every single day, plus the 30 minutes for the research that you were doing for each of these prospects every day, then you would have 354 minutes. So going back to our slide before, there are 480 minutes in a day, and you would only be spending to send out this level of activity that, again, is going to be close to double of what the average rep is doing on relevance only. You still are only going to use 354 minutes during your day. So you have, roughly 100 and, I don't know what the math is, 126 minutes to be walking around, which is over 2 hours. You have 2 hours to use the restroom, go to lunch, etc. And this is within an 8-hour workday. You would have over 2 hours to basically, do some laps and walk around and, etc. But in the latter case scenario where I said, let's let our hair down here. Let's go ahead and say that I'm having to do research for 18 prospects per day as opposed to 6 because, I don't know why. I just wanted to add that gap in there for people to really drill the point home. So I would take 144 minutes that it took me for the high personalized call or emails. I would give 60 minutes for the 12 emails that were low personalization. I would do 120 minutes for the calls for personalization. And then I would have 90 minutes for prospect research, which would still leave me with 414 minutes out of a 480-minute day if I'm only working 8 hours per day. So sorry, I'm getting a little heated, but when it comes to personalization, not only are the results just there, you're going to have more conversion from a personalization strategy than you are from a relevance strategy, bar none. If you know someone beforehand and you can cite some data, then essentially you are more personalized than any person that has ever reached out to them before. And so they're going to give you a little bit more time and a little bit more credibility because they know you're reaching out to them. So not only that, but when people talk about scale and they say, can you scale it? Can you scale it? Can you scale it? Let's take the definition at scale of the average activity metric in the industry, which is 30 emails via topo research, and it is anywhere from 35 to 40 calls, which means that this was a minimum for my reps. We are close to doubling the activity metric in terms of calls, and at minimum matching the email activity metric. But these were minimums, and my reps were actually flying far beyond this when it comes to the activity that they were doing per day, especially when they got this system. So not only are we bumping the quality, but we are at minimum maintaining the level of activity that the industry was doing and close to doubling. So I just wanted to give a little bit of data here to people who are scared of the personalization strategy of, you can bump the quality and you also can hold at minimum the steady of the activity that they would be doing, be expected of them. So last piece, and then I will let everyone go. Let's light up the theory of you should only do personalization for enterprise only. Or you should only do personalization for tier 1 accounts, but tier 2 and 3 accounts you should stay away from, or SMB and mid-market you should stay away from. So I've heard that theory quite a bit in the industry of oh, well, only for the accounts that matter to me should I be personalized. Only to the accounts that are really important to me should I care and do some level of research because they really matter to me. And when I heard this theory, every single time I hear this theory, it's just been a ticking time bomb for me about the math behind this enterprise theory needs to be lit up. So let's go ahead and dive in. So number 1, it takes the exact same amount of time to write a personalized email to prospects in enterprise companies that it does to prospects in SMB. So there's no additional level of complexity to personalizing to someone over at Intel versus personalizing someone at a SMB startup in Silicon Valley. So it takes the exact same amount of time to personalize. So that's the first piece whenever we're thinking about hunting into enterprise and SMB, that it takes the same amount of time to write that email. Number 2, a buyer's preference in terms of if you know them or not has nothing to do with what market segment they're in. It's not like someone starts at an SMB company and hates you knowing who they are and then goes to an enterprise company at Oracle, let's say, and all of a sudden starts loving personalization. There is no difference in terms of humanity, of preference between if someone likes receiving personalized emails, based on an organization that they work for. So I'd say point A underneath this preference item is arguably the only time I could see someone preferring personalization over non-personalization is arguably for different buyer personas, or arguably for different industries like sales tech versus fintech, et cetera. Sales tech is really going to like it. Fintech might not like it so much, et cetera. But never, point C, never for segments within those industries. So I've never seen a case scenario where maybe someone who was a VP of marketing at an SMB company had a very low preference for personalization, and a VP of marketing at an enterprise company had high preference for personalization. So arguably for different buyer personas, I could go with you here, even though I mean, in my experience, it's like, even if they're a back-end engineer, and even if they're, someone who's a little bit more on the product end, they still enjoy whenever you know who they are. So I actually would disagree here, but I would go with you a little bit here on buyer persona might change a little bit, or for their industry that it might change a little bit, but never for the size of company within that industry. And D, arguably, if they don't get as much attention, they typically like it more. So someone who is a senior vice president, over at, let's say, Intel, they probably get a lot of people who know who they are, versus someone who is a frontline leader over at Intel. They're going to get less people who really know who they are. So arguably, the higher you move up the chain, the more they get personalization, they get personalized messages, so it's not as special to them. So whenever you go to a frontline manager, or you go to an SMB company, or you go to a company that's not necessarily that much of an in-house name, usually they have higher preference for personalization because they're like, holy cow, I never get these messages. I don't get flowers at my doorstep every single day. I'm not, Mark Zuckerberg, or I'm not Benioff, or I'm not Jack Dorsey. And so I don't get people sending me gifts to my front doorstep. And so if I'm someone who's a little lower down, or a frontline manager, I don't typically get nearly as much recognition as someone who's a senior vice president. So whenever you're talking about going up market and selling up market, arguably, certainly matched in terms of personalization preference, but I would say it's actually even more aggressive, the desire for it in SMB and mid-market, because they don't get that much outreach from people who really know who they are. So I think it would actually be more, I would want to see the data, but in my experience at least, I've seen SMB companies and mid-market companies actually liking it even more so than enterprise. So point number one is it takes the same amount of time, regardless of if it's enterprise or SMB. Point number two, your SMB companies, worst case scenario, I think, would like it the same as enterprise, but I would venture to guess that they would like it a little bit more. And then the third point is that it's more effective than relevance. Based on the data I've seen, and based on my experience with 3 teams doing it, it's just point blank, personalization is more effective. Personalization and relevance is more effective than just relevance only. So if we are holding the same amount of activity, which again, I went through the theory of we are actually doubling average activity metric using personalization with a 2-hour lunch break with an 8-hour day, and it's more effective from what I've seen of personalization and relevance versus just relevance alone. And my buyers in SMB and mid-market arguably like it more so than enterprise because they don't get that focused on. And also it takes the exact same amount of time to write an email to an SMB organization than it does to write a personalized email to enterprise. Then the theory makes no sense. It makes no sense. So personalization is not just for tier 1 accounts. Personalization, the strategy, is for tier 2 accounts, tier 3 accounts. My personal view is that you should set the bar of who you're going to want to go after, certainly in terms of outbound, or postbound and bridgebound and say, hey, I want to sell to companies that are over this marker, but whoever I say that I'm going to sell into, I'm going to sell into them well, because it's going to be more effective. Even if my quota is higher for meetings within SMB, it's more effective for me to use a personalization strategy, whether my meeting quota is 25 versus my meeting quota is 15 versus my meeting quota is 5 within strategic. It's more effective to use personalization. So from the core of me, I understand how the confusion happened, and I'm certainly not blaming the logic. However, I just want to plead with the industry of these points of, it takes the exact same amount of time. The results are there, and SMB and mid-market actually really, really likes it. So if you're going to deploy a personalization strategy and relevant strategy, and I'm not saying in all cases that you should, there is a session within Personalization Point that is on the cases that I think you shouldn't. But if you are going to deploy a personalization relevant strategy, which in most cases I would argue you should, then I would go ahead and I would set the bar for the accounts that you are that you want to call into, and then treat everyone in terms of how much research that you do on them the same. So I wouldn't treat, tier 3 not nearly as well, or tier 1, a little bit better in terms of prospecting. Now, in terms of once they close the deal and CSM attention and et cetera, I certainly understand that factor in terms of ACV or product size that they've bought. But in terms of pipeline and in terms of outreach, I would say you set the bar and then you personalize to everyone above that bar, so that every single last person that comes across your reps or every single last person that comes across your email has a really, really good first impression of your company, because you took the time to do the one thing that most people aren't doing. You took the time to know exactly who they are. So in summary, I know where the theory came from, and I know that we had a good heart. I know that we were thinking like, hey, we need to spend a little bit different amounts of times when it comes to booking these meetings. But my plea with the industry is that the math is there for personalization and relevance. And if you're going to decide to do a strategy, it's because it just works. So let it just work on everyone who's over that line. So I certainly know where the theory comes from, and I'm respectful to those who knit it together. But I think that we have the time for a change. We have an opportunity to say, let's be pragmatic and let's look at how long do each of these approaches take, and how can I deploy the best strategy for my team in specific so I can drive the most pipeline on the back end. So I'm excited for people who took a look and to work this into your daily flow. Hopefully this took a little bit of the sting out of personalization and how long it should take you and what the daily workflow looks like. And as always, very excited to see people's results. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching that session. If you liked it and you want to hear more, go ahead and go to flipthescript.co and make sure you check out all the other sessions that we have available. And if you really loved it, if you go to Flip the Script on LinkedIn, tag me and your top couple of takeaways so I know what you want to hear more of. But either way, I hope you have a great rest of your week.